Just give it up, man. Let's call it a night and go home. Help me! Look, it's over. When you see what's happening, help me! Give it up! Oh!
Hey Whorehounds, Steve again. This video feels like your parents just left for the weekend and you're standing in the horror aisle at Video Depot with like $5 and an all too familiar mission. Find something so edgy and weird that none of your friends have even seen it. It's not Freddy, it's not Jason, it's something with a cover so bizarre and intriguing that the clerk has to dust it off before ringing it up. And today we're exposing 6 films so obscure that even die-hard VHS collectors debate whether they actually existed or if we collectively hallucinated them during a marathon of drinking Jolt Cola and destroying a bag of Keebler Pizzeria chips. Yum. Alright man, let's get into it. Some say he is still falling this many years later. That's tragic, man. Despite the title suggesting it might be a sequel to Witchboard, actually the same director Kevin Tenney, so you're forgiven for the confusion, Witchtrap is actually a standalone haunted house thriller that combines elements of Poltergeist, The Legend of Hell House, and possibly whatever Tenney was watching on cable that week. The plot centers on a team of paranormal investigators, which was just super common in the late 80s, and security experts hired to cleanse a mansion of an evil spirit. They're here. Nah, they weren't here. That was a whole different thing. Specifically the ghost of Avery Lauder, a Satan-worshipping murderer whose presence is causing violent supernatural mayhem. But things go predictably wrong when team members start dying in creative ways, in gruesome ways, and in hilarious ways. Linnea Quigley pops up again here, and at this point didn't have to audition for her role. She just slid right in. Tenney shot this back-to-back with Witchboard in about 17 days. He only took 6 days to write it, and while it lacks that film's commercial polish, Witchtrap makes up for it with surprisingly solid practical effects work and a willingness to kill off characters in ways that feel super mean-spirited. I mean, that axe to the forehead shot still hits hard today. The film operates in that late 80s sweet spot where practical gore effects had really reached some sophistication, but budgets were still pretty damn low, so that filmmakers had to be creative about camera angles and timing to make sure the kills still landed effectively for the audience. On the back of the VHS box, there is a warning notice that states, "This motion picture is not a sequel to Witchboard." What's actually interesting about Witchtrap is how it presents itself as a serious supernatural thriller for about 40 minutes or so before transforming into a straight-up slasher with a paranormal entity as the killer, complete with point-of-view shots and stalk and slash sequences that wouldn't feel out of place in a Friday the 13th sequel. It's like Tenney couldn't decide what kind of movie he wanted to make, so he made both and hoped audiences wouldn't notice the whiplash they were witnessing. I can't stop saying Witchtrap as opposed to just Witchtrap, which I'm sure it's just supposed to be Witchtrap, but it's not Witchboard. The mansion location does a bit of heavy lifting atmospherically, and there's genuine craftsmanship in how Tenney builds suspense, even when the dialogue suggests this was probably a first draft script, making Witchtrap, I did it right that time, a really great film class case study in how a competent director can elevate material that shouldn't work nearly as well as it does in the end.
You keep out of it. Not after what you said about Melody.
Well, what have we here?
You guys queering off down there or what? Hey guys, it's not what you think.
Help me out here. Has anyone heard that term used ever in their life? That is a riot. If you found Nightmare Sisters at your local video store, congratulations, because you likely had the coolest clerk in town as you rang up this total raunch fest. Written in only 7 days, this super trashy comedy horror hybrid from director David DeCocteau stars Scream Queens Linnea Quigley, Brinke Stevens, who actually provided her own dominatrix outfit, and Michelle Bauer as 3 nerdy college girls who accidentally summon a succubus during a seance and transform into sex-crazed party animals who seduce and murder their way through a fraternity house. And that's not that bad. Shot in just 4 days of mostly one-take scenes for around $100,000, which was pocket change in 1988 standards even, the film knows exactly what it is. It's pure exploitation fun with a sense of humor about itself, featuring more gratuitous shower scenes than plot development and dialogue that sounds like it was written during the actual filming. Takaktu had already established himself in the direct-to-video horror market with films like Sorority Babes in the Slime Bowl Bowl-orama and Nightmare Sisters fits perfectly into that late 80s subgenre of horror comedies that prioritize practical effects, comedic gore, and actresses who were comfortable with the material demanding wardrobe requirements or lack thereof wardrobe requirements. This is the kind of movie that 14-year-old you convinced your older brother to rent for you and the boys, and honestly, it taught us plenty about the creative possibilities of low-budget filmmaking and the importance of what a little makeup can do to the quiet girl in the back of the class. Now, if Nightmare Sisters was pure cheese with a wink, our next entry comes from the king of recycled footage himself, and you know who I'm talking about.
Go.
There's a movie in the works, Not of This Earth, and you didn't bear a thing in this movie.
I did bear a thing in this movie.
It's
You
quite
like
a
see
departure.
glimpses of other parts of my... Just because Roger Corman, his movies are just like that. They have, mean creatures and shapely women.
Jim Wynorski's remake of Roger Corman's 1957 sci-fi horror hybrid is peak late 80s direct-to-video madness, starring Tracy Lords in one of her first mainstream roles after leaving the adult film industry, and sadly her last nude scene ever, as Nadine, a nurse hired to care for a mysterious man named Mr. Johnson, who turns out to be an alien vampire draining humans to save his dying planet. Wynorski shot this thing in like 12 days. Yes, 12 days. And it totally shows as you'd imagine it would, with sets that look like they were borrowed from other productions, supporting actors who seem genuinely confused about what movie they're in, and special effects that range from surprisingly decent to props they probably found on the way to the set. But this film works because Wynorski understood the assignment. This wasn't trying to compete with the Hidden or even the Blob remake that came out that same year. This was pure B-movie entertainment designed to fill video store shelves and Saturday afternoon cable slots. Lords actually delivers a committed performance despite the ridiculous material, and there's something charming about how the film takes its absurd premise, the alien with sunglasses that shoots killer rays needs blood transfusions to survive, completely seriously, while also throwing in gratuitous hot tub scenes and a punk rock band getting massacred mid-performance. Not of This Earth represents that sweet spot where exploitation cinema meets actual competent craftsmanship, proving that you can make something entertaining and watchable even when your budget is basically whatever change Wynorski found laying around Corman's last abandoned set. The opening credits for this one feature a montage of clips from various other Roger Corman movies, including Battle Beyond the Stars, Forbidden World, Galaxy of Terror, Humanoids from the Deep, oh man, and Battle Beyond the Sun and Piranha. Sample footage from each of these movies appears numerous times throughout this movie as filler footage, as well as 2 full-length scenes from Hollywood Boulevard and Humanoids from the Deep. That repurposing is a Corman staple, from full scenes to, soundtracks. While Corman was busy recycling old footage, another son of a legendary effects artist was about to unleash something genuinely nasty on unsuspecting college campuses.
See, I need an A in physics this summer in order to graduate, and I'd be willing to do anything for an A.
Honestly, I'd have all my students doing my laundry, I'm not gonna lie. The Invisible Maniac is like Hollow Man as a high school sex comedy directed by someone who, fortunately for us, watched too many Porky's movies. And somehow this pitch got greenlit with enough money to rent a school location for a week and just roll up their sleeves and get it done. The plot follows Kevin Dornwinkle, a geeky neurotic physics teacher who goes insane after his invisibility experiment gets him fired and ultimately committed, then escapes years later to become a substitute teacher at a high school where he uses his perfected invisibility serum to spy on female students in various states of undress before going on a murder spree. And one of those makes perfect sense, and one of those seems a little short-sighted. Director Adam Rifkin, using the pseudonym Riff Coogan, which should tell you everything about how he felt about this project, made this exploitation cheapie in 1990, but it didn't hit video until later, and it exists in that wild gray area where it's trying to be a sexy comedy and a slasher simultaneously while succeeding at really neither. Melissa Moore, Shannon Wilsey, and Dana Bentley all appeared in Sorority House Massacre 2, creating a weird little exploitation cinematic universe that nobody really asked for. The film features Noel Peters as the sympathetic maniac, and his performance walks the line between campy villain and genuinely creepy predator in ways that likely weren't even intentional. With practical invisibility effects that are actually way more competent given the obvious budget limitations, they clearly studied their John Carpenter playbook for these scenes. What's fascinating about the Invisible Maniac from a 2026 perspective is how it represents the absolute tail end of the video store exploitation era, when filmmakers could still get away with this kind of frat boy testosterone heavy content before cultural shifts and changing distribution models killed off this particular strain of horror comedy, sadly forever. A sequel was planned but never came to fruition. It would have been called I Was a Teenage Invisible Maniac, and I would be a teenage maniac watching that. It's a time capsule of attitudes and filmmaking approaches that they feel ancient now, making it essential viewing for anyone studying how quickly cinema evolved into the early 90s. And speaking of filmmakers who knew how to maximize limited resources, let's close out with a director who somehow made 2 movies back to back and tried to convince everyone the second one was not a sequel.
Mr. Dickens, file those test papers.
These test papers, ma'am?
File.
Yes, ma'am. They're filed.
Honestly, it looks like me and Mr. Dickens have a similar filing system. Anyway, you snuck this one past your parents because the cover looked like a generic teen slasher, but hell high is what happens when someone watched Carrie and The Breakfast Club back to back and decided to mash them together with zero regard for coherent storytelling. Although there's some if you squint. The plot centers around Miss Storm, a high school biology teacher with severe PTSD from accidentally killing 2 kids in a swamp as a child. She gets psychologically tortured by 4 delinquent students you just saw Mr. Dickens during a prank gone wrong, and then she absolutely loses it in ways that make Carrie White look emotionally stable. In real life, she was actually pregnant throughout the filming, and a handful of scenes had to hide that baby bump, which now that you know that, it might be obvious here and there. Director Douglas Grossman shot this in 1986, but it sat on a shelf for 3 years before getting dumped onto video, which explains why it feels like it exists in some weird time warp where mullets and leg warmers coexist with late 80s fashion sensibilities. This beaut was shot in about 18 days and used 3 different high schools as locations. What makes Hell High memorable wasn't the kills, though some of them are super creative, but the atmosphere of pure dread that Grossman somehow conjures from what's essentially a classroom revenge thriller. And the final 15 minutes where Miss Storm goes full unhinged contains imagery that'll stick in your brain like gum under a school desk. Particularly that bathroom scene that somehow got past whatever ratings board was paying attention in 1989. Speaking of things that barely got past the censors, our next film took the exploitation playbook and jacked it all the way up to 11, man.
You're witnessing the most significant breakthrough in modern medical history.
Super distracted by this ponytail, I'm not gonna lie. You were saying, Doctor? This is 1988's Primal Rage, also known as hell, it's just rage. And it's what happens when someone takes the infected monkey trope from 28 Days Later, but 15 years earlier, adds a Florida University campus setting, a guy with a ponytail, and dials up the insanity with a side of genuinely simple yet disturbingly effective practical effects. This plot follows a college journalist investigating animal testing at his university who accidentally releases a baboon infected with an experimental rage virus that turns anyone it bites into frothing homicidal maniacs, essentially making this the spiritual predecessor to every viral outbreak horror movie that came after, except with way more neon lighting and beautifully just made up science. Director Vittorio Rambaldi, who's the son of special effects legend Carlo, who created E.T., clearly inherited his father's talent for creature work because that infected baboon looks legitimately menacing, and the subtle transformation effects on the human victims are unsettlingly effective for a film that probably costs less than a used Camaro or an IROC, a teal one. What's wild about Primal Rage is how it balances being a genuinely mean-spirited horror film. I mean, people don't just die, they suffer in protracted, brutal ways, and some deservedly, with the kind of absurd 80s excess that includes a Halloween party massacre sequence and a climax involving campus security trying to contain a rage virus with what appears to be zero protocol and way less common sense than you'd think they would have. For critical response, I have to say this is a really well thought out take by Joseph A. Zimba and Dan Budnick in their book Bleeding Skull, a 1980s trash horror odyssey. Primal Rage borrows the plot and general sense of chaos from George Romero's The Crazies, gives it a shot of Cro-Magnon idiocy, and adds a relentless Z-rape metal soundtrack, leapfrogging over mundane hilarity, squirm-inducing gore, which is eyes being ripped out, and the savior fare of the late 80s. Primal Rage does not ask much from its audience. All we have to do is keep our eyes open. And I'll tell you what, my eyes were open. The film vanished almost immediately after its limited release, becoming one of those I vaguely recall this one scene kind of titles that VHS traders would hunt for years later, and watching it now you can see why it got buried. This thing is nasty in ways that feel genuinely uncomfortable rather than fun like some of the videos on this list. Like someone made a serious horror film but forgot to tell the distribution company that audiences in 1988 wanted their scares with a wink and a nudge, not this kind of relentless brutality. If you thought a rage virus was uncomfortable, wait until you see what happens when invisibility meets a high school full of horny, hormonal teenagers. As all high schools do, I guess. Now, these weren't the movies that got sequel after sequel or even launched franchises. These were the one-and-done wonders that appeared on video store shelves for 6 months before disappearing into the ether, leaving only faded memories and increasingly rare VHS copies as evidence they existed at all. Gang, if you're hungry for more deep dives into the weird corners of 80s horror, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss the next cruise down Nostalgia Boulevard. Trust me. Thanks so much, all. I love you guys. This was super fun. Everyone, man, stay cool.